The wind carried a strange hum that morning, low, rhythmic, almost human. Fanny Kelly couldn't explain why it made her stop in the middle of the trail, fingers trembling on her horse's reins as though some invisible hand had brushed past her shoulder. Later, she'd swear that hum was the first whisper of the truth she would spend her life trying to bury, the truth about what the Sioux were preparing for long before she ever set foot near their camp. But in that moment, she only felt unease, thin and cold as a strand of ice slipping down her spine. She had joined the westward-bound wagon party only weeks before, eager for a new beginning with her husband and the small dream of a home somewhere the world felt young and forgiving. Dawn spilled gold across the plains, painting everything with a kind of fragile hope. The other travelers laughed easily, spoke loudly, and believed the worst thing waiting for them on the trail was a broken wheel or a sudden storm. Fanny managed a smile for them, but that uneasy hum stayed with her, vibrating in her bones. She had read once that the plains carried secrets, old, unsettled spirits, wars that never ended, ceremonies whispered in languages older than memory. She brushed off the thought. Superstitions. Nothing more. Hours later, when the attack came, she would remember that sound. The first sign was silence, sudden and heavy. The second was the blur of movement cresting the hill, shadows on fast horses, gleaming paint across their skin, feathers like slicing streaks of color. Panic tore through the wagon line. Screams, gunshots, horses shrieking. Someone shouted her name, but it was drowned under chaos. Fanny grasped her husband's arm as he shoved her toward the wagon's cover. "Stay down," he yelled, firing desperately at the riders closing in. The bullet smoke stung her eyes. Men fell. Women clutched children. The prairie swallowed their cries. She remembered a hand, strong, rough, grabbing her wrist and yanking her from the wagon. She remembered her husband shouting her name one last time before something cracked against her skull and the world went white. When she woke, the sun was sinking behind the hills, flaming red against the sky as though the world itself had bled out. Her head pounded. Her wrists were bound. The riders surrounded her, warriors of the Sioux, faces painted for war, their horses snorting steam into the cooling air. At first, anger burned in her. How dare they take her, a woman who'd done nothing wrong? But beneath that anger was fear, the deep, helpless fear that she might never see her husband again. One of the warriors, tall and broad-shouldered with a hawk feather braided into his hair, crouched beside her. His eyes were unreadable, but not cruel. He spoke to her softly in his language, the words unfamiliar but the tone strangely gentle. Fanny turned her face away. She refused to let him see her cry. The warriors mounted their horses, pulling her up behind one of them. She clung to the rider's waist because she had no choice. The alternative was falling to the hard earth and being dragged or worse. The wind bit her face as they rode into the rising dusk, the plains stretching endlessly before them. For hours they traveled, until finally firelight flickered in the distance. A village rose from the earth, tipis arranged in deliberate circles, smoke rising like thin columns into the darkening sky. People stepped from their shelters as the warriors approached, women with long braids swinging down their backs, children who stared at Fanny with open curiosity, old men whose eyes mirrored centuries of stories she could not yet understand. She expected shouts, jeers, maybe stones thrown at her. Instead, the village watched in weighted silence. She was led to a tent near the center of the camp, where an elderly woman inspected her injuries. Her hands were rough but careful, the touch unexpectedly tender. Fanny didn't understand her words, but she recognized the tone of someone used to caring for others. Still, she was a prisoner. Every breath reminded her of that. Days passed. The villagers worked, hunted, cooked, tanned hides, and cared for children with a rhythm and purpose that bewildered Fanny. She ate what they gave her. She slept under watch. She flinched whenever voices rose, fearful each argument might be about her fate. She learned the name of the warrior who had first spoken to her, Tokala, meaning, fox. He visited her often, not with threats but with an odd curiosity. He brought her food, water, a blanket lined with rabbit fur when the nights grew cold. Sometimes he sat in silence, staring into the fire as if trying to decide what she was supposed to mean to him. One night, as flames crackled outside, Fanny overheard murmurs, sharp words exchanged among warriors. She didn't understand them, but she recognized the tone of disagreement. Tokala stepped into her tent soon after, his face grave. He knelt beside her, placing a soft leather pouch into her hands. His brows knit, his voice low, almost pleading. She opened the pouch and gasped. It held a strip of bright red cloth, a small painted wooden figure, and an intricately braided piece of rawhide. She didn't know their significance, but Tokala's expression told her they weren't ordinary. He touched his chest, then the items, then pointed toward the direction they had ridden from, toward the westward trail, toward the settlers, toward her world. She shook her head, confused. His jaw tightened. He pressed the items back into her hands. Outside, drums began. At first, Fanny thought her heart had imagined the beat, slow, steady, echoing across the camp. But then the rhythm grew stronger, more insistent, vibrating through the ground. The villagers gathered, voices rising in chants that prickled her skin. Tokala looked toward the sound, and something cold flickered in his eyes. The sun dance. She had heard travelers whisper of it, rituals of endurance, visions, sacrifice. But she had never imagined she'd witness one. The idea terrified her, though she couldn't say why. Tokala motioned for her to stay. He stepped out of the tent. Fanny pressed her ear to the flap. The drums grew louder. Voices deepened. The air outside thickened with something electric, ancient, primal. She peeked through a small gap in the hide. The entire village circled a tall cottonwood pole stripped of bark, painted with symbols she didn't recognize. Warriors danced around it, chests bare, skin painted in bright colors that glowed under the firelight. Some carried eagle feathers. Others held drums, rattles, or ceremonial staffs. She watched, both horrified and mesmerized. Then she saw it, one of the young warriors, being led forward, his face painted in solemn determination. Elderly men tied rawhide thongs to wooden skewers, and then pierced the warrior's chest near the shoulders, threading the thongs through the wounds. Fanny clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The warrior stepped back, his body shaking, but he didn't cry out. Instead, he raised his head and joined the dance, the rawhide pulling taut as he leaned into the pain, as if offering it to the sky. Fanny stumbled backward from the tent flap, trembling violently. Was this what Tokala had warned her about? The items he'd given her, were they protection? Preparation? A symbol of something she wasn't yet meant to understand. The drums pounded harder. She looked down at the red cloth again. Suddenly she wasn't sure if she was meant to be afraid of the sun dance. Or of what role she might be expected to play in it. Something outside changed. The chants grew softer, more concentrated, as though the entire village shifted its focus. Fanny dared one more look. A second warrior walked forward. Tokala. Her breath caught. He removed his shirt, revealing his strong, scarred chest. He spoke to the elders, pointing once in her direction, the tiniest gesture, but unmistakable. Several heads turned toward her tent. Her stomach dropped. The wooden skewers were brought forward. Fanny stumbled back, heart roaring in her ears. She understood nothing of their language, nothing of their intentions, but instinct told her one thing with terrifying clarity. Tokala was entering the sun dance for her. And whether it was meant to protect her or bind her to him forever. She had no way to escape what came next. The drums grew savage. The fire flared. And Tokala let the elders pierce his flesh. Fanny pressed both hands to her mouth, but her gasp still escaped. Outside, the Sioux began to dance. And inside the small prison of her tent, Fanny Kelly realized her captivity had only just begun. The night of the sun dance left Fanny sleepless, her thoughts a tangled storm of fear and questions she could not name. Dawn crept over the camp with a soft gray solemnity, muted as though even the sun understood the weight of what had occurred. Smoke coiled from dying fire pits. Warriors who had danced through the night lay wrapped under blankets, breathing heavily, bodies trembling from the ordeal. Life stirred slowly, as if the whole village had been cracked open and was now piecing itself back together. Fanny remained in her tent, knees pulled to her chest, clutching the red cloth Tokala had given her. She could still hear the echo of drums in her bones. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the thongs tugging at Tokala's flesh as he leaned back, refusing to yield. Refusing to scream, refusing to break. And she wondered, how could she fear him, yet feel something else tangled under that fear? A strange, uneasy thread of gratitude, or protection, or something deeper she dared not name. Footsteps approached. She tensed, expecting a warrior, an elder, perhaps someone sent to summon her to judgment or ritual. But it was the old woman, the healer who had tended to her wounds days earlier. She stepped inside, her face lined with age but softened by wisdom. She carried a clay bowl filled with warm water and herbs, placing it gently beside Fanny. With careful motions, she wiped Fanny's face, smoothing her hair, cleaning the dust and tear trails from her skin. Fanny wanted to speak, to ask what would happen to her next, but her voice felt trapped. The elder woman paused, touching the red cloth in Fanny's hands. She nodded, her expression grave, and spoke a name. Tokala. Fanny looked down, swallowing. She didn't know the rules of this world, but she understood enough to know that the red cloth meant something binding, something she had not agreed to. Before she could form a question, the tent flap opened again, and two warriors stepped inside. They gestured for her to rise. "No," Fanny whispered, shaking her head. "Please, I don't understand." Their faces remained solemn but not unkind. One reached out a hand, gently but firmly helping her to her feet. She glanced at the healer, searching her face for answers. The woman simply touched Fanny's arm with a reassuring firmness, as though telling her she would not be harmed. Fanny stepped outside. The entire village stood in a wide semicircle around the ceremonial pole. Tokala was there, bound wounds wrapped across his chest in strips of fresh cloth. He stood tall despite the exhaustion in his limbs. Elders approached her, chanting low, rhythmic phrases that vibrated through the very air. Fanny felt her pulse hammering as they led her forward. Tokala met her eyes. For the first time since her capture, she saw pain in them, not physical, but something deeper. Something like a plea. One of the elders gestured to the items she held, the red cloth, the braided rawhide, the wooden figure painted with symbols she did not know. He placed his hand over her heart, then over Tokala's. Fanny stiffened. The truth came crashing over her like a storm. The ritual was not punishment. It was not execution. It was not sacrifice. It was adoption. And Tokala had chosen her. Panic surged hot and fierce through her. She took an involuntary step back, shaking her head. "No, no, I can't. Please, I don't belong here." The villagers murmured, startled by her fear. Tokala stepped toward her, but the sudden movement made him wince. His wounds were still raw. He spoke softly, the cadence of his voice soothing though she could not understand the words. He extended a hand. She stared at it. A warrior's hand. A captor's hand. A man who had suffered the sun dance to give her a place among his people. She did not take it. A shadow crossed Tokala's expression, disappointment, but not anger. He lowered his hand slowly and addressed the elders. Their response was stern, but not cruel. The oldest among them stepped forward and placed the red cloth over Fanny's shoulders. A symbol. A marker. A sign. She was under Tokala's protection. Her breath shuddered out. She didn't know what protection meant in this world, whether it came with obligations, expectations, choices she could not yet make. The crowd slowly dispersed, returning to their duties. The drums from the night before lay silent now, but the air pulsed with the memory of their rhythm. Tokala led her away from the circle, walking slowly, mindful of his injuries. He stopped near a small stream that cut through the camp. Water shimmered under the morning light, cool and clear. He gestured for her to sit. Fanny hesitated, then lowered herself to the grass, hands clenched in her lap. Tokala sat across from her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the faint scent of sage. Children laughed nearby, their voices soft and distant. Finally, Tokala touched his chest. "Tokala," he said gently. "I know," Fanny murmured, surprising herself. He pointed to her. His brow lifted, questioning. "Fanny," she said. "Fanny Kelly." He repeated the name slowly, as if memorizing each syllable. Then he nodded. Patient silence settled between them. Tokala drew shapes in the dirt, symbols, figures, paths. He pointed west, then to her heart, then back to the south where the sun dance had taken place. He traced the shape of a home. Then he drew a barrier. Then a circle. He was trying to explain. But she could not understand. Frustration tightened her chest. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Tokala reached out, not touching her, but near enough she could feel the intention behind the gesture. He shook his head gently, then placed his hand over his own heart. He wanted her to know something. That he had not taken her as a possession. That he had chosen to protect her. That he had endured pain, not to bind her, but to give her a place where she would not be harmed. Yet she still felt like a bird in a cage. The days that followed were a quiet unraveling of her fear. Women taught her how to weave mats, how to grind corn, how to prepare hides. Children followed her, giggling when she mispronounced their names. She watched warriors hunt buffalo, their coordination so perfect it seemed choreographed. She saw old men sit in circles, telling stories in voices that carried the weight of generations. She learned small pieces of their language: water, food, fire, friend. And sometimes, when she caught Tokala watching her from across the camp, she felt her heartbeat shift, not in fear, but in something she refused to acknowledge. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains. Lightning cracked the sky open, and thunder shook the earth. Fanny sat in her tent, curled in a blanket, listening to the wind whip the hides. Suddenly Tokala ducked inside, his hair soaked, his breath uneven from running. He held her gaze, waiting. After a long hesitation, she lifted the blanket slightly, allowing him space to sit but not touch her. He settled beside her, leaving distance, respecting her space. The storm raged outside, but inside the tent, a fragile peace formed. At one point, a violent thunderclap shook the ground, and Fanny flinched. Tokala instinctively reached out, then paused, giving her the choice. Slowly, she allowed her hand to rest in his. For a moment, the storm ceased to matter. Weeks passed. Fanny felt the tension inside her shift. She understood now that Tokala had not forced his protection upon her. He had offered it through sacrifice, through pain she had seen with her own eyes. The sun dance was not something performed lightly, nor for selfish reasons. It was a plea to the spirits. A covenant. A vow. But the truth she had tried to ignore grew heavier each day. She still wished to go home. One morning, a messenger arrived, another Sioux from a distant band, carrying grim news. Settlers had been seen on the horizon, moving toward the area. Armed. Angry. Searching for stolen kin. Searching for her. Fear and hope clashed violently inside her. Returning home meant safety, family, freedom. But it also meant leaving behind the people she had come to understand, the culture she had learned to respect, and a man who had nearly torn his own flesh for her. Tokala found her near the stream that evening, staring into the water. He crouched beside her. "You," he said, pointing toward the horizon where the settlers were coming. Her throat tightened. "My people," she whispered. "My home." He nodded solemnly. Then he drew a single line in the dirt. One path. One choice. He placed the red cloth beside her, not on her shoulders. A symbol. A question. A release. Fanny's breath hitched. He was giving her the freedom she thought she wanted. "Tokala," she whispered, voice shaking. He touched her hand lightly. Not insistence. Not demand. Goodbye. Tears spilled down her cheeks. In the morning, she walked toward the approaching settlers, heart torn between two worlds, one she was born to, and one that had carved itself into her memory through fire, pain, and unexpected compassion. She did not look back. But she felt Tokala watching from the ridge, a silent figure framed against the rising sun, keeper of a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. The truth that the Sioux had not taken her life. They had reshaped it, and the truth she would never speak aloud. Part of her had never wanted to leave.